Parents of Reddit. What has your child done to make you think they lived a past life? Story 1, he literally told me. He was 3 and pretending to run over his Lego man. When asked to stop, he said, "That's how I died, isn't it?" "No, you've never died." "Yes, I have. When I was 2 last time, the car hit me. My other mummy cried then. I came to you." He's a teen now. Doesn't remember a thing about it. Story 2, my friend had a miscarriage before she had her first daughter. A few years ago, when her daughter was about 4, a group of us were at a party, and her daughter was sitting on her lap and said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, I left you before Mommy. I was hurting really bad and I wasn't ready." My friend asked her what she meant, and her daughter said she left her before she was born but came back super creepy. Daughter doesn't remember this conversation and still doesn't know about the miscarriage. Story 3, my family took everyone on a trip to see their old neighborhood. They drove by a house where about 15 years earlier a little girl was hit by a car and died. My cousin, who was about 4 at the time, never had been in the neighborhood and never heard this tragic story, stopped what she was doing and said, "Oh, that's where I died, isn't it?" She then resumed playing with her dolls or whatever it was she was doing. Story 4, my mom loves to tell this story when I was young. I really wanted to learn Russian, so they got me into a class. In general, Russian was very easy to pick up and use. It sort of made sense, and I could construct complex sentences. The teacher told my mother that it was spooky because I could speak it in a way that they hadn't been teaching me. I could figure out colloquial phrases. To this day, I still have it and haven't lost my Russian. Story 5, my 3-year-old niece. In a hotel near her home, I've been here. I used to sit in this chair and knit. Wouldn't say anything else when pressed further. Another time in an antique shop, we looked at an old-school desk with a flip-top lid when she bemused, said, "Where's the inkwell?" It just seemed strange that she'd expect there to be one. Story 6, my kids are all pretty deep thinkers. I was at one of those new mama playgroup things, hating my life, and this woman was talking about the beautiful experience her son recalled to her about being in the womb. Think like warmth, love, light, all those kinds of things. So I turn to my son, who's I think 4, 5, and I'm like, "Do you remember Mama's belly?" And he goes, "Yeah, IT had some pretty cool toys, but I got bored, so I opened up your butthole and said, 'Mommy, I want T.O. come out now,'" which totally doesn't answer your question. Or maybe it does. He was obviously a comedian. You dicks, the story is a few years old. He was 45. Story 7, I've posted this before, but my daughter, right before she turned 5, was in our hall in the middle of the night. Still asleep, whimpering and crying. I got her to come lay down with me, and when I asked her what the dream was, she got very upset and said it wasn't a dream I remembered. She told me she remembered when she was a bad dog, and they made her go to sleep. I asked her about it again later, and she got very upset. Said she was a bad dog and started crying, saying she didn't want to remember it again. She has no idea what it means to put a dog down, let alone that it is what happens to bad dogs. Story 8, I have a few, all the same kid. First, when my son was 3, he told me that he was once kidnapped and the police accidentally shot and killed him when they were trying to rescue him. When he turned 5, he told me he had never made it this far. Also, when he was 5, we drove past my grandparents' old house. They've been gone 16, 18 years now. He told me, "I used to play in that house with Pappy, my dad, when I was little, except the house used to be white. The house did indeed used to be white, and it had been painted an ugly gray. My dad also had 9 siblings, 3 of which died in infancy. Edit, none of the siblings were shot by police. A set of twin boys born prematurely in the 1940s didn't survive a week. My aunt died of internal bleeding the mid-1950s. She was 2. Story 9, I told this in another place here, but it was in the early afternoon of Halloween. This is a rough time of year for me because my first child was stillborn near this day. I was sitting in a chair in the den. My husband was at the desk on the opposite side of the room. My 2.5-year-old daughter was moving around the room, not really doing anything. As always happens on this day, my thoughts turn to my stillborn daughter. Suddenly, my daughter plops a book onto my lap. Remember, she's 2, can't read yet. Additional note. The walls of the room were pretty much wall-to-wall books. The book was given to me after the stillborn. It was a pagan book for grieving parents. Startled at the coincidence, I just kind of stared at the book. My daughter, too, flipped open the book and pointed imperiously to a paragraph. I obeyed and read the paragraph. It was talking about how a child who dies might reincarnate back into the same family or somewhere nearby. So I wondered where my child might have reincarnated. My daughter patted my leg and said, "In white here, Mommy." Up until those words, nothing had been spoken out loud. It gives me chills every time I remember it. Edit, added, forgotten detail, edit, wow. So many comments. Thank you so much. To answer some of the more frequent questions, "In white here, Mommy," is baby talk from right here. Mommy, those are the first words spoken at this time. The only word spoken for a long time. The name of the book was Our Children Forever, but I don't remember the author's name, and we have way too many books. It will take me a while to find. It might be this one. It wasn't any specific type of pagan, but definitely more new age spiritual. rather than traditional big three, if that makes sense. I was not ever telepathic that I know of. Story 10, my son went for over a year talking about his other mommy and daddy. With a completely straight and serious face, we have a blended family. So he has me mom, and at his father's house his dad, stepmom, and brother. He said he had 2 fake mommies and a fake daddy, and then a set of real ones. When trying to get clarification, thinking he was having trouble adapting to new family roles, he informed us that we were the fakes and that his real parents were much older, lived far away on a farm. With his older brother, that story came up off and on, as well as weird side statements from him. We had him at the ER one time in a private room. He hears voices outside, which he normally wouldn't pay any mind to. He perked up, looked at the door, and goes, "That sounded like my real mommy's voice." He was very excited and animated about it. My kid is usually pretty deadpan, so that was off too. I decided to just write it out, but admittedly, it did freak me out at first. He hasn't done it in a while. Story 11, not a parent. But my mom told me this story when she was in law school. Her mother, my grandmother, bought her a string of pearls. My mother continued to wear this same string of pearls long after graduation and long after my grandmother died. My grandmother died 2 days after I was born, in the same hospital. She got the chance to hold me once, during which time my father swears she transferred her soul into me. One night, when I was about 3 or 4, I crawled into my mother's lap. She was wearing her pearls, and I reached up to touch them. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I got these for you before I was born." Then I went back to playing. My mom says she still gets goosebumps when she thinks about that story. I also inherited my grandmother's love of the Packers despite never having lived in Green Bay. Story 12. So, I am raised Roman Catholic. My son is raised Roman Catholic, but I was dating this Muslim guy who would play prayers constantly that were on YouTube. This particular day, my boyfriend was playing a prayer that's supposed to protect you from jinn. My 3-year-old son looked up from his coloring book, said, "Clear as day. Now, they will be gone for 1,000 days." My boyfriend looked him dead in the eye and was like, "How do you know that?" My son smiled, shrugged, and continued to color. I don't know if this is true, but my boyfriend explained that if you recited that specific prayer, it was supposed to banish evil spirits for 1,000 days. To this day, I still get chills when I think about it. My mother was also super freaked because I told her dad he used to be my baby, but I drowned when he was my size. I was 4. My grandfather drowned when my dad was 4. Story 13, when I was younger, I would have sleepwalk, appearing to be fully conscious, then lying down and going back to sleep like nothing happened. There have been times my mom caught me opening windows in the middle of the night. Another time she was in the kitchen reading the paper, and I walked in, made myself a glass of orange juice, drank it, then went to sleep at the table in front of her. One time my mom and dad were watching a World War II documentary late one night. Something about the push into Europe and a massive tank battle, probably Aircourt. I walked downstairs, and my parents told me to go back to bed. I said, "I want to watch the battle again." Parents said, "I've never seen this documentary." I said, "No, but I remember it. We were in that one." It went boom, points to a specific tank in the middle ground. I remember the one behind us going boom too. Mom puts me to bed, saying I was talking nonsense. Comes back and jokes to my dad. Dad says he's not so sure because while she was putting me to bed, both tanks exploded. The one in the rear first, followed by the one I pointed out. Edit, this was a documentary. The footage I was referring to was combat camera crew recording the battle. Story 14, when my oldest son was 3, he used to wake up crying and saying that he wanted to go home. Over and over he would repeat it. I would reassure him that everything was okay. He was at home, happens for many months. We had a huge map of the world in the hallway, and one night, when he was upset, I took him to the map and showed him where we lived and asked where his other home was. He pointed out a small town in Mexico. Day after day, he pointed to the same exact place. So we took him there. It was a beautiful little area, and we had a great time. There was nothing profound in any of his reactions. When we got home, he started sleeping through the night and never mentioned it again. We live in California, and my husband and I are both white. However, our son is adopted, and although his bio father is technically unknown, we were told it is probable that he was Hispanic. Story 15, my 3-year-old said, "I was your mom in heaven multiple times when I was 6 weeks pregnant with her. My mom died unexpectedly the day she found out the secret that I was pregnant at 40 with what would be her last and 21st grandchild. We were going to surprise her on her 75th birthday. 2 weeks later, but a niece let the secret out. When my girl was 4, we were looking through pictures boxes. I have no family pictures posted in my house. Later that night, I realized my girl took 3 pictures of my mom and put that in her room. She's never seen pictures of my mom before. I asked her why she took those pictures, and she said, because I'm pretty." Story 16, when my daughter was a little younger than 4. Not only did she never get mad once, she loved to put on bathrobes and sit Indian style and close her eyes and meditate, with no knowledge of the practice that we were aware of. Story 17, when I was about 3, I used to tell my mom stories of being a little Chinese girl. Apparently, I lived at the bottom of a hill with my grandmother, and I died in a flood. When I was 6 or 7, I came home from school upset that I'd been surrounded by a group of boys, and I cried to my mom that it was like when the soldiers on horses came to take us away. Story 18. I've only ever shared with a few people how my late mother regularly hid a packet of biscuits, usually chocolate digestives, from my brothers and I. So when we had visitors, there was always some biscuits to go with a cup of tea, how it's done in Britain. I once caught my daughter stuffing a packet of biscuits in the back of a cupboard behind a big bag of pasta. At the time, I thought Crafty Cow wants them for herself, but left them there to see if they'd disappear. Maybe for a teaching moment about not being selfish or something. They didn't disappear, but reappeared when some friends came over. She just waltzed out of the kitchen, just as my mother used to, opening a packet of biscuits. She never knew my mother, and I'm pretty certain nobody else would have encouraged this pretty specific behavior. I don't believe she's the reincarnation of my mother, but I'm just intrigued at her selflessness. She doesn't get it from me. Those biscuits wouldn't have gotten past a couple cups of coffee with me around. She still does it too. We have a biscuit box in the cupboard, usually with a few packs of biscuits, but when I keep a check on how many packs I bought, there will be one short or it'll come across a random packet in a cupboard somewhere. And she likes to be the biscuit bringer when we have visitors. Story 19 have posted this before, but my mom loves to tell the story when little me was with her driving past the cemetery, and I announced loudly that's where they put you when you commit treason against the king. Story 20. Sorry, I don't have a story, but I have to comment on how it is crazy how 99 of the kids in these stories are all around the same age. Very few go past age 5. It's like memories from a past life carry over. And when a kid can finally communicate, well, age 3 to 4, they start talking about memories. So then the kid starts making memories for the new current life, and the past life fades away, and they don't remember even bringing it up. That's what's freaking me out the most. The age consistency is insane. Story 21. I asked my son once who he was before he was my son. He was small, maybe 3. He looked at me sadly and said it was dark and cold, and I wasn't anything, just all by myself. And then he perked up and said, and before that I had black wings and I flew. And ID takes shiny stuff because all shiny things are mine. And that is how I realized my son was Magpie in his past life. And gave me a clue where to find my missing earrings. He had a hidden cache of jewelry in his room. The little imp. Story 22. Jim Tucker, a UVA professor, has explored the topic of reincarnation in children. His case examples are as chilling as some of those mentioned in this thread. Reincarnation children. Story 23. When my sister was 3, she would go on and on about her brother, Brian. We're all girls, and we don't know where she would have heard the name. But it was all, Brian does this, Brian, and me used to do that, on and on. Thinking Brian was an imaginary friend, I asked her where Brian was now. She said he's dead. I am, too. The bomb got us, and our house is gone. Very weird. Story 24. The first time my 6-year-old stepdaughter got to handle my practice broadsword, she knelt in front of it like a Templar praying to the cross of the crossguard. It was weirdly solemn, too. Story 25. When my then 2 to 12 years old daughter heard a loud boom, then jumped into a small, low spot in our yard and yelled foxhole. With a terrified look on her face, she had never seen any movies about wars or anything. Definitely had me curious. Story 26. This is about my sister. We have always called her a baby genius, and she has always seemed like an old soul. I remember when she was playing in another room and my mom was cleaning. My sister comes into the room and asks my mom, "Have you been cleaning because it really smells like ether in here?" As in the surgical anesthesia used in the Civil War. I had never even heard of that word before. When we asked her how she knew the smell of ether, said, "It is what we used." Story 27. My daughter was 3 to 4. She kept asking me, "Mommy, do you remember when you were little and I was big? I took good care of you. We went to the store all the time." Then when her little brother was born, she asked me if she could call him Augie, pronounced Augie. I asked her where she heard that name, and she told me that she made it up. My great-grandfather passed away August 31st of 2001. She was born September 7th of 2011. My great-grandfather used to take me to King Soopers a few times a week, and he had a dog long before I was born named Augie, nickname for Augusto. I had a hard time wrapping my brain around it. Story 28. I was walking down the street with my daughter, who was about 4 years at the time, and she pointed to a random house and told me about how she had lived there with her sister, but they had to leave when the house went on fire, and her sister went to heaven. Story 29. I'm not a parent, but when I was 4 to 5 years old and sitting in the back of my mother's car on a drive, I suddenly had very strong memories of sitting next to a little blonde girl that I knew had been my sister smiling at me in a different car. I suddenly became very afraid and cried. It's almost 2 full decades later, and I'm still freaked out, because I know I didn't form that memory in this lifetime. I have a sister, but she's a dark-haired Asian girl. Story 30, not as a parent's, but my niece drew a picture of a man in her room that she kept telling her parents about. He had two different colored eyes, and one was gray. When asked why it was gray, she responded, because he can see the storm coming. Story 31, my cousin died from a stray bullet in '92. 9 months later, his mom had another son, and in a few years, they visited the house where they used to initially live when my murdered cousin was around. Kid walks in the house like he owns the place, had never been there before in his life, and was like, "Oh, your mom slept. Here's sis slept here. We used to play cards here." And then he goes to the room where my deceased cousin slept, and this was my room. Story 32, would someone confirm and or notice that all of these stories have a child either 3 or 4 years old? Maybe that is special age for triggering memories of past lives. Come on, everyone. Go to your nearest 34-year-old and commence the interrogation. Waterboard the out of them if needed. Gotta get that info. Story 33, last night, my son asked me, "What's my mission?" When I called him over to me. He's 3. Why did he ask me what his mission was? Why was he being all hush-hush about it? Was he an assassin? I don't have kids, but I was the kid. When I was around 2 or 3 years old, my parents were driving with me, sitting quietly in the back seat. As we drove through a village around 15 miles from home, I said this is where I lived when I was that other little girl. Apparently freaked my parents right out, but my mom always wished she'd have asked me about it at the time. Story 34, my grandmother passed away about 10 years ago. We were very close, and my whole life she always told me that she would be my guardian angel after she died. When my daughter, now 5, was about 3, she had terrible night terrors and would have a hard time going to sleep. I would spend the evenings with her, comforting her to help her get to sleep, reading books, talking to her, etc. One night we were talking about, what do you want to be when you grow up? She kept telling me that she used to be a grown-up. After prying and asking what she meant, she told me that when she was a grown-up, she used to be my grandma. She then told me a story about when I was young. I had an accident and was burned when helping her cook dinner. It's something I never told her, but did actually happen. It completely creeped me out at first, and she has never really mentioned anything else like that since. Story 35, my grandmother reluctantly told me how my uncle, who was around 2 or 3 at the time, described to her in great detail, skinning the white men, "We are white." Story 36, I didn't witness this myself, but when my little sister was 3, she's now 8, she apparently looked at my gran really seriously and said, "Remember when I was really sick in the hospital?" This had actually occurred, but it was the first 2 weeks of her life. Since then, she's been fine. My gran obviously thought she was remembering this through stories. She corrected her, and she said, "Not that time. Before then, when I was 1 again, I had another mummy then, but I think I like this one better." Story 37, when my daughter was younger, she often talked about her other family. She went into great detail, but she hasn't mentioned them in a long time. She also described what it was like being inside of me when I was pregnant. Story 38, we live in Ohio. Took our 4-year-old to Cape Cod for a long weekend. First day, there we kayak with her down an inlet to a beach. She gets out, looks at the ocean, and says, "Oh, it is the ocean." Where I used to come before I knew mommy and daddy. My wife and I just looked at each other. We were creeped out. Story 39, my son used to be terrified to go to sleep. He would ask me repeatedly if he would wake up for just over a year from when he was almost 3 to a bit over age, for he would talk about how last time when he was a baby he went to sleep but didn't wake up, and he'd talk about how sad it was and how he would miss me if he didn't wake up. He would repeat this every other night, but sometimes would give no details, and other times he would give me more details. He was so little the details were hard to get. He would say he loved me and would never forget me. He'd be surprised in the morning and very excited that he woke up this time. He'd comment about techniques to make sure he woke up, which were very strange kid things like, "Remember my toy truck?" It was really, really sad. He's 7 now and remembers nothing. Story 40, my daughter started sleepwalking when she was about 1.5. Every time she does, she walks around, chooses a spot, and then starts digging in the carpet. If you ask her what she's doing, she says, can't find it, and starts to cry. She's 3 now and still does it occasionally. My husband just bends down with her, closes his fist, and tells her, "Hell, keep it safe." And when she's satisfied, lead her back to bed. I told my mom, and I said I hope she was a pirate who stashed treasure somewhere. And when she finally remembers, we'll be rich. My mom looked at me and said she was thinking it was something else, that she's looking for a dead body. Way to creep me out. Mom, my younger daughter, who is 5 months old, has a funny birthmark fully across the back of her neck at the base of her skull. I mentioned to my husband how in some cultures, it's believed that birthmarks show how a person died in their past life. And he said, "Who beheads people these days?" And immediately went, "Oh, ISIS," and he got sad. Edited to add my mom's childhood thing was super freaky, and I just remembered that this is probably a good thread for it. So when my mom was young, she'd have a recurring dream about a concrete room with bars in the windows and a sink to one side, a chair in the middle, and a Hasidic Jewish man sitting with his head bowed in the chair. Now, she's Chinese and from Taiwan, had never met a white person until she came to America for work, didn't know what a Hasidic Jew was, etc. She came to the U.S. to work for a Chinese newspaper, and one day, she passed a coworker's desk and saw a picture in an article that made her stop for a second look. It was the exact room in her dream, down to the chair. Turns out that during WW2, a boat of 6 Jewish refugees from Russia were caught off the coast of Taiwan, and they were kept as prisoners. All of them died in prison. But the weirdest thing was that that last one who passed away died the month my mom was born and was in the same town she was born in. So my mom has a piece of a Hasidic Jewish person's soul in her. In Taoism, I'm not Taoist, but it's part of the culture. They believe that the soul is made up of 3 parts, 2 of which return back into the big blob of the universe. And so your new soul could have parts of souls of other people, and someone else could have the same parts, so it's entirely possible you shared a past life with someone else. Story 41, she asked if I remembered when she died, or when her family died. My daughter then told me about her 3 brothers that died and their names, but I forgot them. Then get parents died, then she died, but she was a boy. Then she came to this family, and she likes it better because we have medicine that works. She then grieved for them for about an hour, with me trying to help her through it. She was 6 years old, with autism, and a speech delay. It was quite a shock for her to relay the whole story to me. The next day, she told my sister the same thing, almost word for word. Story 42, my daughter would freak out and start crying and screaming while repeating, why I got married, I just got married, I got married, over and over again with this tone filled with grief that I never heard come out of a child so small. 2 and 12 is pretty young to be sobbing your heart out. It was a cry that I had only ever heard from adults who have lost the love of their life. Story 43, when my youngest daughter was 3 years old, she would very often get upset and insist I help her find her kids because they needed her. She said she was in a car accident and died, but her 2 children in the back seat survived and needed her. By the time she was 5, she no longer remembered, but for almost 2 years, she had an intense drive to find her kids and let them know that their mommy was okay. Story 44, my mom tells me that just as I was able to speak, I told her one time that I was starting to forget. She asked me, what do you mean, what are you starting to forget? The place where we all are before we're born, the beautiful place where we wait, I don't want to forget about it, but it's getting so hard to remember. At this stage, I'm told that no elements of religion have been discussed and that I was too young for TV. My parents aren't very religious anyhow. So strange to think what I was talking about. Story 45, apparently. I used to always creep my mom out when I was really young by singing a full song. Over and over again whenever I was in the tub. She said she has no idea what language it was, but it was always the exact same. She swears it wasn't a child's gibberish and was obviously a full language, just not our native English. I try to remember it, but I just can't quite get there. I do remember singing it, though, and then one day not being able to sing it anymore when I was probably 6 or 7 and being distressed by the loss of it. I wish I knew what it was. Story 46, when my son was 3 years old, my husband decided to take him on an airplane tour of our small city. They booked a tour in a small 3-seater plane, pilot and my husband in the front, and room for the little guy in the back. When they got out on the tarmac, though, our son pushed past the pilot and climbed into the pilot's seat. When my husband told him he couldn't sit there because that was for the pilot, our boy got very still and quietly said, "It's because I crashed last time, isn't it?" Then he started to cry and shake his head and said, almost yelling abhorrently, all those people died because of me. And he climbed back down and started running back to the terminal in tears. My husband finally got him settled down by explaining that his legs were too short for his feet to reach the pedals, and not because he crashed last time. So back they headed to the plane and got settled in. Sitting in the back, my boy asked if he could have a headset, which he received, with the mic switched off. The pilot didn't tell him the mic was off, though, so the little guy started doing his checks and trying to talk to the tower. Needless to say, the pilot was a little freaked out by all this, so he never did ask our son about when he supposedly crashed a plane. 3 years later, we all headed to an aviation museum, and our now 6-year-old son started talking to one of the curators about a certain type of World War II British plane. I was a bit surprised because we didn't have any books about planes in our house and had never shown an interest in them before. Lucky for my son, though, the aviation museum was in the process of restoring one of the very airplanes my son was asking about, and they offered to let us have a look even though it wasn't ready for display yet. Apparently, a private collector had modernized the plane sometime in the 1970s or so, and they were in the process of restoring it to its original condition. My son started pointing several different items in the plane that he thought weren't right, had been replaced, etc. When we asked how he knew about this, he said he'd flown onto these a few times when he was big. He couldn't tell us much more except that he normally flew a different plane, and that head crashed it because he made a mistake. He also said that several innocent people died in the crash, and that it wasn't their time to die yet. He got very sad then, and said he didn't want to talk about it anymore. When we asked about it again when he was in his teens, he said he remembered the trip to the museum, but didn't remember being big before. Story 47. Imagine the absolute horror you'd feel if you reincarnate and keep all of your memories, and you see your family talking on the news about how you died, and you want to go to them, but your parents think you're just being crazy. Story 48. When I was about 4 years old, I told my mother that I wanted to phone my mom. She didn't think anything of it. A few minutes later, she hears me talking and comes in the next room to find me speaking to a woman. I somehow knew the phone number and the woman's name. I told her I was sorry for leaving and that I missed her and loved her. My mom took the phone and started apologizing, saying it was just her son playing. The lad's son had died less than 10 years prior in an accident, and she was in shock and crying, not knowing what to say. I feel like thinking about it now, because I must have really messed her world up when she was probably getting over the grieving. Really freaked my mom out too. Story 49. Once when I was a little girl and riding in the car with my mom, I apparently asked her, "How do I go back?" She asked where I wanted to go. I got frustrated that she wasn't understanding me, and said to the stars, Mom. She began to explain space travel to me and how only astronauts get to go to outer space, and that if I became one I could go too. Apparently I got upset with her and told her she was wrong, and said that's not right. I know, because that's where I'm from, and want to go back. My mom has always been a very spiritual person and didn't really question it. Sometimes she would ask me to describe the place I was talking about, and I would say I didn't remember. She said I kept mentioning how I was from the stars randomly for a while, but as I got older I stopped. When I was around 10 or so, I began wanting to be an astronaut and grew obsessed with outer space. I still have a fascination, but I sort of changed paths around the age of 15 when I realized how terrible at math and science I am. Story 50. My Aunt Mile has a story that my husband told her when he was around 3. He asked what happened to his mommy with black hair. His mom's hair is brown, and his other brothers and sisters only had one older sister at the time. She asked him about it, and he told her about how they lived underground and there was a fire and they died. Oddly enough, his family is Native Alaskan, and it is possible that some of his ancestors lived in small subterranean grass shelters during fish season. Pretty interesting and creepy. Story 51. She's never really done anything that I would call evidence, but I knew the second I laid eyes on her that she was an old soul. We bonded instantly, but it was almost like when you've been separated from an extremely close friend or relative for a long time, and you finally reunite, and you just have that warm home again feeling. I felt that with her, and I know she did too, because she was screaming until she heard my voice, and then she was instantly soothed once I got a hold of her. I know a lot of babies do this, but she didn't cry again for days. She was literally the easiest baby to raise. It always seemed that she knew that she was expected to just do things at certain times. When she learned to sit up all by herself, she smirked the whole night. Every picture we took of her, she would have this look on her face that just screamed, "Yeah, this is good, making progress." When she was 8 months old, she crawled over to me and handed me her bottle that I had just made her. She would never drink from another bottle again. She started saying actual words at a ridiculously young age, 4 months. To this day, she knows things that neither me nor her teachers can explain how she knows them. Every person that has spent more than a day with her has told me that she is an old soul. She's never said anything that pertained to a past life, but I know in my heart she has lived several.